Hello, everyone. We're back. Hopefully, you stretched a bit and got your favorite beverage to keep the energy up for the next panels, which are super exciting. So maybe Dr. Gans and Dr. Barron, can you turn on your videos? Perfect. See you. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for staying with us for our third panel of the day. We hope you're enjoying the conference so far. And if someone just joined, let me introduce myself. I am Catalina Lopez. I am the director of the Aquatic Animal Alliance at the Aquatic Life Institute, and I will be moderating this conversation today. So our panel is about stunning and slaughter. And personally, I was really interested to moderate this panel because I think this is one of the key welfare pillars that we work on. And there's so much innovation going on and so much research that it's hard to keep up. So I really want to learn from our experts what's new and what we can look forward to. So the question that we're asking our panelists is, what are the effective ways of stunning and slaughter for aquatic animals, and how we can use this important pillar of welfare to reduce suffering? So a couple of housekeeping items before we start. If you just joined, the audience is muted upon entry and you have your cameras off. You can post your questions in the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of the screen in the Zoom platform. If you're using the Huba platform to view the conference, you can also post your questions there. Every session is being recorded and streamed live on Facebook, just so you're aware. And very important is that we expect respectful and productive discussions, and we have zero tolerance for harassment and discrimination of any kind. And now I want to introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Albin Grans is an associate professor at Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and he is Sweden's representative in the fish subgroup EU platform on animal welfare. And Dr. Matt Barron is the food business manager at Compassion in World Farming, and he focuses on the welfare and humane slaughter of farm fish. He is a marine biologist with a PhD in fish welfare. So very excited to welcome you both. And yeah, if you want to start, Dr. Gans. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? I'm sorry if I'm not.
Almost. Grans.
Yes. Thank you.
It's a Swedish letter in there. That's why it's tricky. So can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So thank you for organizing these days and including a session on slaughter. And let me just take that now so I'll see everything myself. So Albin Grans, that's how I would pronounce it. But as I said, the Swedish A is not the easiest one. I study fish and cardiovascular physiology in fish, and a lot of fish welfare research. And I will get back to a bit how I ended up here. So if we go to Europe, that's where I'm sitting here. We have an evening now, and I guess you guys are in the morning. When the citizens of Europe were asked, different countries a while ago, a few years ago now, why they thought fish welfare is important, or a matter of fact, if it was important, 79%, for me, striking high number, said that they thought that the welfare of fish should be protected to the same extent as welfare of other animals we eat. And from the point with the popular sustainability, they also asked, so what do you think that sustainable should mean if it's marked on a fish product? And here I was maybe even more surprised that 57% of the asked answered that they actually thought that the fish being killed quickly and painlessly should be within sustainable And most of us know that sustainability and sustainable in buying fish has very little to do with how the fish were stunned and killed. So no one really dreams of working with slaughter and killing. And lately, the last almost 10 years that I've been doing it, my mother's been asking me if I can't work with something fun again. So how did I end up here, and why did I get stuck here? And it kind of gives a background on the whole problem and why we're working so much with this now. I want to take you back to the first study I did on slaughter of fish, and this was a project that was granted from the Swedish Board of Agriculture, and they wanted to look in for options of using carbon dioxide stunning, which is still commonly used in Sweden. The alternative here was a dry stunning, electrical stunning equipment. So basically, they wanted to have some evidence saying that this was a better method and that we should move into it. We also include a control group, which is going to be the green one. And if we start with we were there doing the study, we were doing some behavioral observations, and we could see, as many have seen before, that when a fish is put in carbon dioxide, it's minutes of escape behaviors. They have a very hard, from a practical point of view, they also have a very high mucus production when put in carbon dioxide water, which makes them very difficult handling. So the personnel risk miscuts. The dry electrical stunning, on the other hand, the fish were immobilized within a second or less than that, and they were very easy to handle. So the personnel were very happy with trying this new method. Everything looked good. Unfortunately to say, we also took a bunch of other samples and brought home to the lab and started looking into. And there we were interested in physiological stress responses and indicators of stress, physiological indicators. And we did a range of them. And if you're interested in the details, I put the reference on the paper down in the bottom here. But I picked one, and it's the stress hormone cortisol. And to our surprise, the stress levels of cortisol were 3 times as high from the electrical stunning as in the carbon dioxide, although we observed all these vigorous escape attempts. And we started to look for reasons why, and we could discuss that the whole day, but it all came down to that we couldn't really draw any good conclusions from this study because of this design of it. And the reason was that we couldn't really determine when these fish went unconscious and when they were not. And one thing that was raised was the possibility that the fish going through the electrical stunning were only electromobilized and not actually stunned. So a few years later, I was involved in a report in the Scientific Council in Sweden, and they wanted to again have an overview of stunning methods for farmed fish, focusing on Arctic char and rainbow trout, and it's mainly rainbow trout that is primarily farmed fish in Sweden. We took information also from Atlantic salmon, as there's more information available there. And the conclusions from this one was that future research should ensure that the stunning leads to unconsciousness and the consciousness does not return during killing. So now we're at 2019, and you might ask what I always come back to. Is this not already done? This is what we read in the EFSA reports and from 2004, and still 15 years later, the same questions are brought up. And it all comes down to this. So consciousness, how do we measure consciousness in fish and how do we determine it? We know maybe that we can't measure consciousness, but what indicators can we have of consciousness? And the golden standard for looking into this is looking at brain activity in EEGs. And this can be done in fish, and it has been done for some time. This is a example of a study done in Atlantic salmon. And So we started investigating how to do this in a good way. This is a pre-stunning from the paper, 1.5 minute post-stunning and 5 minutes post-stunning. And first thing that I think is obvious with this, that interpreting this kind of data is not easy. For me, even if there were, after working with this for now almost 10 years, I see no difference in these. I can't see how the traces to the on the 1.5 and the 5 represent a fish that is unconscious compared to the others. There's more to this article, and so if you're interested, go and read it. But we still, this was not like a straightforward way to look into this. So what else to do? Well, there is another way of doing it, and this is also nothing new. The Steves, Kesting and Botton, I think, were both involved in this in the 1991, looking at visually evoked responses. So some kind of stimuli while measuring EEG, and you get a response. Okay, so I could do this on myself. The stimulus is this light that blinks every half of a second. And we end up with this, because what we wanted a method that we would not have to restrain the fish very much, and we did not want to surgically implant electrodes unless we really, really need to. So what we designed was this silicone cup where 3 plate electrodes are attached to the head of the fish with suction. And basically, if the brain is active, they respond to blinking light, and you see this clear response. This is the verse. And if they're unconscious, it's a flat line. The gradual difference between an unconscious and conscious fish is more complicated, but it's a robust method, and we can be fairly sure. Well, we can be very sure to say that if we can't see a response after a treatment, the fish is not responsive, and it's unconscious. So the problem is this is very complicated. It's a complicated analysis. It's a complicated designing and putting on, and doing this is nothing easily done in an aquaculture facility. So do we have to do it? It's all these other visual behavioral indicators that have been lifted. And unfortunately, I would argue that yes, to develop it, we do. And this is one of the studies, and we have looked in several species now and with several different methods of stunning. And this was a carbon dioxide stunning. We looked at different visual indicators and loss of brain function via verse. And if we plot these in a one-to-one relation, we can see that, again, the red is a situation where we can't trust the visual indicator, and the green is in fish with visual indicators that we can't trust. And as you see, it's very few, and that's a few ventilations that actually correlates with the fish that actually lost their verse. So visual observations is not enough, and I would argue that you can use them to identify when things are not working in a practical situation. But for developing new methods of stunning, you really need to go down to looking at brain activity. Also, again, we could just get in the line with the critique against carbon dioxide stunning. It's not the fast, and it's not a good method. So what are the alternatives? And we have looked into primarily percussive stunning and electrical stunning, and I will mainly focus on electrical stunning here. So electrical stunning, sometimes you read that, well, is electrical stunning a better option if the question comes? And in most cases, I would say no. There's basically, it's very complex. You can do it in many different ways. You can use different combinations of currency, voltage, frequencies, AC/DC, or different combination of these, and different exposure times. And basically, there's a million ways to torture a fish using electricity, and we're really trying to find the right combinations to get the job done and actually have a stunning effect. And instead of just looking into everything, because if there's a million possible combinations, we can't investigate those. So we partner up with industry collaborations to see what their systems could do and how we could try and validate that, and how we could maybe manipulate them later to work in a more satisfactory way. And so far, most work we've done been on rainbow trout, but since we started with this, it's been a great interest both nationally and internationally, and we have a lot of collaborations ongoing and trials that we're hoping and planning, and some are running. And the take home from this is basically that every new species you introduce new problems. Even the salmonid seems to be quite different here. And these last two that popped up, the night tilapia and the African sharp-toothed catfish, these are species that are coming up strong in Sweden due to the recirculatory system that's advancing. And this is some of the data that we have. This is our data and some from older studies. And I just wanted to highlight the problem we found here. So the red ones are from, the blue ones with red circles are from night tilapia, and this is from our own studies. And we could see what electric field combination with current density needed to get the transient stun of 30 seconds, 50 seconds, and then when it's no red circle around, it was a permanent effect. While on the African sharp-toothed catfish, you can see that they're much more robust. They're kind of like an eel, very difficult to stun and kill. And in our study, which is this one with the red circle around it, it took all the capacity we have to have an effect, and even then it was a transient effect. So what we did here was that we combined it with some kind of percussive stunning, and this giving us a slot of 30 to 50 seconds to complete it. And with African catfish, we combined it with gill cutting and icing, and then we could get a permanent stun effect. But that's really not why I brought this up. It's just I wanted to highlight how much is needed. And these farms that we collaborate with here, they used to put their fish straight on ice, and that's not they're not allowed to do that with Swedish legislation. You're not allowed to put live fish in farms on ice. So they were asked to, what I mentioned before, you should go over to electrical stunning. They bought a commercially available system for it, and a couple of years later, we went there and tested how well their new system corresponded to our lab work and other people's lab work. And it turns out this red box here is the capacity of the system they had. And this is really a problem that I see, when just saying that go to electricity and then you end up with systems that are in no way has the capacity to fulfill the effects you want. So why is it so difficult to stun fish with electricity? And what have we found? Like what are the reasons behind this? And there's a lot of unanswered questions there, but let me give you one example. So if we look at the mammal model, so this example is from sheep. When you electrically stun it, you get something that's called an epileptic-like seizure, or a grand mal often called. And this consists of a tonic phase and a clonic phase. After that, the sheep might recover. Usually there's a periods of a silent period before they start recovering. It varies quite a lot in length, but so in this example, it took at least 60 seconds before the transient effect of the electric stun happened in these sheep. So what they then did was look at different ways of killing sheep. From the start of bleeding, that's where I put the knife, and then until they were brain dead. And they said that it would take at least about 15 seconds to do the cutting, and then looked how long it took for the sheep to die. If they cut one side of the neck, it went over to together with the handling time of 15 seconds over 75 seconds. While if they cut both sides and a successful chest stick, they were able to bleed the animals out much faster. So if we look for here, we know that the stunning at least lasted for 60 seconds. So the one side cut would not be recommended, while the both sides or the chest stick in this case would be. So let's compare this to a fish. Well, we electrically stun it and we get the seizures, but it's a combination of a tonic and clonic seizure often, and the isoelectric, the silent phase that comes after, can be very short. Basically, what we see that even when the EEG is elevated from the stun, we see the fish starting responding to the stimuli, and we even see fish that basically as soon as the insult is over start trying to make escape attempts. And if we then look at this bleeding time for a ectotherm fish, and this is from a study by Rob in 2000 or 2002. I put that reference out. From the time that they gill cut the fish until they died was up to 450 seconds. So if we put this in, we have a seizure that we know lasts for about 10 seconds. And then we have a fish that might take 450 seconds to bleed out. We see the problem here. So how do we get around this? Well, there are ways to manipulate the stun. And one thing is changing the higher exposure times and different parameters. And you can get an isoelectric phase for certain times. The problem, especially with salmonids, is that the longer you expose them and the more effective stun you give them, you also introduce problems with blood spotting. But still, the recovery in this case could come after 60-something seconds. So it's still far from the 150 seconds that it took to kill the salmon in this example. So you need to introduce something new, either a way of killing or a second stun to prevent it from recovering consciousness before dying. So it's a combination of how they respond to the electrical exposure and the long time it takes for them to die because of being ectotherms. That's really causing the big problems with the transient stunning methods. So when are we done? Well, Anna mentioned here on the session before that there's 400 species of foreign fish now, and these are some of the ones being introduced in Sweden as we speak, and we have only started looking at a very few. Because of this, we were again asked from the Swedish Board of Agriculture to make a report on stunning and killing of these new species that have been introduced with the recirculatory systems, tropical and subtropical finfish. And from this report, we found 167 species that were farmed that fitted into this category, and for them, 149 of those, there were no single study published on their welfare during stunning and killing. And that's not the end of it. And I saw on the agenda that this will be touched upon more detail later, but we also use a lot of fish for feeding these fish in farm fish. It's been estimated, this has some, it's now 10 years, but it's estimated up to 450 billion wild-caught fish are used for feed. And there are reports saying that up to 90% of these are food-graded fish. Also, these don't spread evenly throughout, and that's what we heard Eugene talk about before here, that it's the carnivorous species that eat most of it. And it's actually up to 40% of these go to Atlantic salmon. And if you add on the other salmon, it's over 50%. While the salmon themselves only stands for 0.3, 0.5% of individuals. And if you just tweak these numbers, and people will probably come up with others, but it actually says that between 250 and 3,000 small fish are used for feed for one salmon grown up to slaughter size. And talking about sustainability and slaughter, I would argue that you can't really focus on only these few salmons, but you also actually need to start looking into investigating how to stun and kill all these wild-caught feed fish for feed. And that is something that we just started doing. In this project, we focus on herring because it's also a popular food fish in Sweden and Scandinavia. And the project goal is to find a ways of safeguarding the welfare of these herring in wild caught. We've only been on one trip so far. From this one, we saw that it was trawling times for up to 2 to 5 hours. So that meant that 90+% of the fish that was actually coming aboard was already dead from the fishing, coming out of the fishing gear and the pump. And this from one trip was then over 800 tons of fish, which corresponds to about 5 to 6 million fish. And this is my last slide, and I like to end up with that, because this is actually the same amount of individuals that are slaughtered in Swedish aquaculture annually on this one fishing trip. So this is really like where the big numbers happens, where the most individuals are affected. But also after this first trip, I really can't see that it's going to be a quick fix. And that was my presentation. Thanks for your attention. These are different funding agencies and collaborators that's been involved in the different studies.
Thank you so much, Albin. That was so interesting. I really like that last note where you highlight the size of the problem and how far we are from solving it, but also what alternatives we could look into. Matt, do you want to go ahead and share your screen now?
I shall. 1 second. You guys see that okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right, fab. Okay. Guys, I'm going to look at my big screen here because my eyes are terrible. So if I'm looking away from you, it's nothing personal. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just going to read off the big one. So I will glance back occasionally. So hey, everyone, first and foremost, please let me thank Kathleen, Christine and the team at AAA for inviting me to present today. I'm Matt Barron and I'm the Food Business Manager for Fish Welfare at Compassion and Wild Farming. So as well as giving a brief overview into the welfare and humane slaughter of crustaceans, today I'm going to focus the majority of this talk on a case study that we produced in collaboration with our food industry partners, TESCO and HILTON Seafood, which looked at improving the welfare of white-leg shrimp, pronounced anamai, at harvest. Now, this case study is actually the very first of its kind to introduce a large-scale electrical stunning system, as Albin has already mentioned, for fish, as an alternative and more humane slaughter procedure for crustaceans, with the view to replace current outdated and inhumane slaughter methods, i.e. immersion in ice slurry, which are predominantly used across the industry. As a result of this work, we actually awarded both HILTON and TESCO our Special Recognition Award for Innovation this year as a demonstration of outstanding innovation, commitment and achievement in the field of farm animal welfare. Now, when it comes to aquatic species, Compassion has predominantly provided support on fish welfare to our food businesses. But as awareness has started to increase towards improving the welfare of crustaceans, we are now working closely with our food business partners to bring crustacean welfare to the forefront of their welfare commitments. With respect to fish, our work and welfare recommendations right now currently focus on the 5 key fish species, as you can see here: Atlantic salmon, rainbow trout, European sea bass, sea bream, and pangasius, but there's always scope to work on more, and we continuously add species to this list as welfare concerns are raised. What about welfare considerations and the humane slaughter of crustaceans within the food industry? Well, unfortunately, crustaceans get a bit of a tough time, and historically the sentience of crustaceans has not been recognised within the food industry at all, like it has for fish, and is therefore overlooked with respect to humane slaughter methods. There is, however, significant and growing body of evidence in the scientific literature that shows that crustaceans are sentient animals and can indeed experience both pain and suffering. From this slide example, prawns exposed to painful stimuli have been observed to rub at the affected area, and this behaviour is reduced when an anaesthetic is applied. Hermit crabs have also been shown to remember painful stimuli and actively try to avoid them by demonstrating both fleeing and hiding behaviours. And the European Food and Safety Authority themselves have acknowledged the evidence that indicates decapod crustaceans, like crabs and lobsters, can indeed feel pain, which ultimately means that their welfare needs to be protected alongside their vertebrate counterparts. In fact, crustacean welfare is not currently covered under any kind of UK animal welfare law or EU regulation, which implicitly stipulates requirements of time of slaughter for terrestrial vertebrate species, i.e. fish, and in more recent years, common octopus. This, however, only refers to animals used in research and does not extend to any farmed environments. Inhumane slaughter techniques are one of the greatest concerns for crustacean welfare, where individuals are often subjected to very slow and painful deaths without stunning. The method of immersion in ice slurry being the slaughter method of choice, which is essentially prolonged asphyxiation until death. Crustacean welfare studies and recommendations have only been broadly researched in recent years, but there is still only a handful of research being carried out regarding humane slaughter techniques. And since crustaceans have no legal protection in terms of appropriate welfare standards in many countries, not just the UK, it remains the responsibility of food businesses to ensure that their welfare is protected within their food supply chains. So HILTON Seafood and TESCO have been working together for over 15 years as part of this long-term relationship. We're always seeking opportunities to drive the continuous improvement of farm animal welfare standards. Both companies have excellent public-facing animal welfare policies, which state that all animals, not just vertebrates, should be effectively stunned prior to slaughter. Their suppliers are specifically selected for their commitment to work with them on further developments in animal welfare innovation, sustainability, and any other advances in aquaculture. And following the successful rollout of humane and stunning slaughter of fish, including undertaking electric stunning trials of bass and bream, both companies felt it was important to understand the feasibility of applying these humane stunning techniques for their shrimp. The P. vanami, also known as the white-leg shrimp or king prawn, are the most widely cultured shrimp in the world. 2017 total production of the animal was measured to be approximately 4.5 million tonnes, amounting to approximately 170 to 405 billion individuals globally. Slow suffocation without stunning is still a common slaughter species, with immersion in ice water or ice slurry the method of choice. When these animals are cooled below 4 degrees, they enter a state of torpor, but the effects are not instantaneous, and it is not clear they are sufficiently anaesthetized during cold immersion to limit discomfort, pain, and suffering. Electric stunning has been validated for use in some decapod species, such as crabs and lobsters. There's been some research which suggests that electroshock induces effective stunning in shrimp, such as RSPCA Australia recommend electric stunning slaughter as the most humane method of slaughter for decapod species. Currently, however, this method is rarely used due to a lack of research and commercial trials and because of the specialist equipment that is required. Currently, over 100 million people are supplied to TESCO through the HILTON Seafood supply chain annually. HILTON Seafood have a long-term close relationship with key vertically integrated shrimp suppliers in Vietnam. And over the last 2 years, both companies have been collaboratively working with Amanda Seafood, a Danish supplier, to undertake commercial trials of electric stunning of their shrimp to assess the potential welfare benefits at slaughter. Following a successful trial in June 2020 and review of the outcomes by external animal welfare experts, TESCO subsequently approved the use of electric stunning for their shrimp. And since then, approximately 80% of the P. vanami supplied to TESCO through HILTON Seafood have now been electrically stunned, with the ambition to achieve 100% electric stun in the HILTON Seafood supply chain. This stunning system being the very first large-scale electrical stunning system used for these animals globally. So just a wee bit of background to the trials themselves. The trials were conducted to firstly establish the efficacy of using existing dry electrical stunning technology for the immediate stunning of P. vanami in a commercial setting, and to optimize operation parameters to balance the effectiveness of stun with product quality, which is obviously very important for food businesses and end consumer. Dry electrical stunning technology, originally designed for salmonids, has been successfully adapted for use across a range of aquaculture species, including bass and bream in the TESCO HILTON seafood supply base. The PVanimi trials here were undertaken using the same Optima dry electrical stunner technology. This system is standard to the aquaculture sector, but for this trial, the electrode arrangement was slightly modified from a finfish system to match the smaller size of the shrimp. And all operating parameters under test were consistent with those reported as demonstrably effective in independent scientific research. Now, the trial was undertaken during harvest at a farm in Vietnam, utilising 6 ponds, all uniform in size, containing a maximum density of 90 animals per metre cube. The animals measured 25 to 30 grams at harvest to ensure sufficient size that would always allow them to touch both the paddle and the conveyor electrode during stunning. And the pump was positioned to transfer the animals directly between the pond and the stunner. In preparation for harvest, PVanimi were crowded for a maximum time of an hour using a giant seine net towed by hand around the pond, and then pumped directly from the pond and discharged onto the conveyor belt of the stunner. The welfare assessment of the trial indicated that using a single chute to discharge the prawns onto the stunner, resulting in some bunching of the animals on the conveyor belt, which can result in pre-stun shock. So the single chute was replaced with a dual entry feed, as you can see in figure 2. PVanimi was stunned when simultaneously establishing contact between the conveyor paddle electrode or due to shrimp contact across the paddle and the conveyor electrode surfaces. Although the animals should be rendered unconscious in less than a second, they are exposed to the current for 10 seconds to increase the length of unconsciousness. And the stunned animals were then immediately transferred into totes to be layered with crushed ice, transported to the processing plant with 100 prawns checked for stunning effectiveness at startup. So this method actually replaces the conventional method at the farms of harvest, whether the water level in the ponds is reduced to around 80 centimetres before the PVanimi are crowded into a pond corner by means of a sweep net, before being manually lifted out of the ponds with baskets and emptied within 15 seconds into a well-managed ice slurry, where they are fully immersed and thereby slaughtered. Just a very bit of technical stuff on the optimization parameters. I apologize for this in advance. Fixed frequency of 45 hertz was used for every batch process, but the voltage was varied between 40 and 125 volts. This is really important. For each tested voltage, prawns were collected immediately post-stun into baskets, and 50 kilogram samples were assessed for the effectiveness of the stun, so it is indicated by coordinated leg movement, and stun damage is indicated by surface discoloration and burning, as we mentioned earlier. Following initial review, a further subsample were then assessed for persistence of heartbeat post-stun, persistence of gill baler movement activity post-stun, and duration of insensibility sign of recovery post-stun. These indicators of stun effectiveness are in line with research which recommends that interpretation of behavioural signs should be supported by further research into related physiological processes. Voltage effects on stunning efficiency could be plotted on exponential trend lines, illustrating the greatest relative improvement occurred when increasing the voltage from 40 to 60 in this case. Further improvements were observed at voltages above 75, but these were also accompanied by an increase in the percentage of prawns that had sustained burns during the stunning process. Examination of the subsample of prawns indicated that less than 2% continued to demonstrate heart and gill baler activity, which is indicative of neuronal and respiratory function, in the absence of coordinated leg movement. However, as electrical stunning was followed by transfer to ice slurry, the subsequent immersion in the slurry ensured no full return to consciousness. A significant proportion of prawns were in irrecoverable stun on exit of the stunner, as evidenced by transfer back to a controlled aqueous environment, where none showed signs of any recovery within the monitoring period. And this period was chosen as a worst case scenario to count for any handling delays post-stun, which was 10 minutes. Based on considerations of percentage stun versus percentage damaged or burned, the proposed operating parameters would therefore be 60 to 75 volts. While stunning efficacy is marginally increased at higher voltages, the impact on product quality would make this commercially unviable for both companies. Primary electric stun using these parameters achieves more than 97% stunning efficacy, with the immediate immersion in ice slurry achieving 100%. Since only a small proportion of animals continue to demonstrate both heart and gill baler activity in the absence of coordinated leg movement, overt behavioural responses could be included as the main element of assessment moving forwards. And additional research will also be needed in due course to correlate behavioural measures with neuronal activity once a crustacean equivalent of an EEG can be developed. So just as some take-home messages, this case study is an excellent example of the positive impact that food businesses can have on a significant number of animals by going above and beyond the requirements of legislation and certification. TESCO and HILTON Seafood have worked collaboratively along with their suppliers in Vietnam to improve the slaughter process of P. vanderbilt by adapting the parameters of existing optimal stunning technology using their salmon, sea bass, sea bream, and pangasius supply chain. The technology is also in commercial use by HILTON Seafood UK suppliers for wild-caught lobsters, as well as edible crab in Norway. So the key benefits of this stunning system when compared to conventional immersion in ice slurry include less handling of the animals, reduction in crowding times in ponds, easier access to measure the effectiveness of the stun, the consistency on stun delivery, a faster method to render the animals unconscious and insensible to pain, the most important parameter, and greater efficiency and reduction in labour during the harvest process, although we know initial investments required to implement technology can be quite high for some of these farms. And just to finish, I just want to thank some special people who helped really get this case study from concept to publication. Dr. Kate Mindrum, now at Brunel University, for initiating this case study collaboration with our food partners. Our CIWF Fish team for policy and our food business team, particularly my esteemed colleague Phil Brook for scientific input on case study drafts. Phil's talking on Wednesday, so make sure you catch him. William Davis and Teresa Fernandez at HILTON, and Ben Weiss and Natalie Smith at TESCO for their continued commitment to farm aquatic animal welfare and support and input in getting this case study published and into the public domain. And lastly, thank you for you guys for listening today.
Thank you, Matt. That was super. And I am really excited about companies implementing these strategies and policies already. So I think, there's a lot of potential to have global impact, in terms of stunning and slaughter policies around the world. So we have a few questions and we don't have a lot of time, but maybe if we don't get through them all, we can send them to both of you and you can, email us the answers and we can share with everyone. So the first one is the European Union is currently revising laws on animal welfare, and one of the issues is species-specific guidelines for the slaughter of fish. At the moment, do you both think we have enough to recommend responsible stunning and killing methods?
Should I start? Yeah, I think that we might not have enough to be certain, but at the same time, we shouldn't let what do you say, the best prevent the good. We can't look for best practices instead of implementing the best we know and looking for options. They will be revised and it will turn out that they needed to be revised, but that should not prevent us from writing them. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Anything to add, Matt?
Yeah, I agree with Albin. I think we're not quite there yet, but I mean, we are considerably further along than we were, say, 20 years ago with slaughtering fish, and particularly with the, a lot of companies that we work with predominantly use percussive stun and they use it very well. And now a lot of them are moving into electrical stun and more advanced methods. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. Yeah, but I agree, there's still a little bit of work to go before we can be fully confident that those methods are the right ones.
Definitely. But I think, starting the conversation, like you say, Albin, is crucial because I don't think we're ever going to have the perfect science in terms of welfare anyway. So we have to start making advances in that direction. I have a question for Albin. How reliable is examination of eye roll response in different species as an indicator of effective stunning?
Yeah, I didn't bring the examples with the eye roll. One reason for it seems to be happen around the same time as the ventilation is lost. So the accuracy, what we find, have been similar to that with the problems we do see with ventilation. Also, for a lot of species, it's a very difficult method to do, like practically. If looking at like the catfishes and even with some of the salmon, it's a tricky method, and that's kind of why we're moving away from it. I know that it's been lifted time after time, and I don't really agree with it. Maybe someone that's really trained could do we could join forces and can see how well it correlates. But from our investigations, we haven't found good correlations with it either.
Thank you. I think that answers the question perfectly. Maybe you both could share your thoughts on what the scope of the issue is. You touched a little on this, Albin, but do you think the majority of fish are stunned, like globally? Of course, does it vary by country, but are there countries where we're more advanced in this? And also, what type of species are we most advanced in and where we need more research?
Worldwide, I would say that the majority of fish are not stunned. Even in Europe, I would say the majority are probably not stunned. While in the UK and Norway, where they actually, well, the fish are stunned eventually with the carbon dioxide. That's not saying that it's a good method, because the time it takes. So it's not only if they're stunned or not, it's also if it's a good way of stunning it, achieving it. It really needs to be investigated further. Thank
you. Do you want to add something, Matt?
Yeah, again, I agree with Albin that, if you look at like the UK and the Norway, etc., we work with companies that across their supply chain, they use percussive stun or they use electric stun. But there are parts of Europe and the world and particularly working around sea bass, sea bream and pangasius, where we know for a fact that those kinds of stunning methods are not used at all, and actually their preferred method of stun would be thermal stun, which in our opinion isn't a stunning method at all. That is essentially just slow asphyxiation until death in ice slurry. They're the ones that we really need to focus our attentions on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's also key. Like, how are they being stunned, if they are being stunned, and is that considered acceptable in certain places and regions? A question with a comment. So, brilliant presentation, Albin. I agree. How do you rate the potential of ultra high pulse stunning?
We haven't tested it, so I don't know, but we have discussions about doing it because it is an interesting method, and I really hope that we get the opportunity to investigate it further.
Thank you. I think we have a couple more minutes. This is a really interesting question. Knowing that most of the farm fish is coming from low-income farmers from Asian countries, how much do you think we can aspire to humane slaughtering in aquaculture? And what can be an alternative for these farmers to fulfill the expected market welfare standards? Would it be more feasible and worthwhile to work in providing positive experience before the slaughtering stage?
I have to say, I totally understand, in more developing countries, it's difficult. And you take the shrimp, for example, most of those farms are in Vietnam, so in developing countries, and technology of this kind is expensive. So in order for them to really adapt in the future, they need to be partnering with companies that are going to essentially invest in this. I don't think the happier things before slaughter for the animals is the key. I think the key is we need to ensure across industry and across globally that these animals are humanely stunned and slaughtered. That is our end goal. I don't think having things in place before that to make them, more comfortable, etc. It is about that stunning and killing technique needs to be nailed down. So it is a tricky one. I totally understand, particularly with the more developing countries. It needs to be about investment, whereas more developed countries can afford these systems. So it's a bit of a balancing act between companies and the producers.
Absolutely.
I agree with Matt there, and it's for some methods. Sometimes like the before period is a bit forgotten. Like with percussive stunning, we know that if the hit hits where it should, it does the job. But like all the handling and so some methods, yes, you should focus maybe more on the pre-stunning handling and those parts because they're such an important part of the success of the stun. But we can't really just focus on everything being good before. We need to solve the stunning problems as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think welfare is a comprehensive concept, and we shouldn't just focus on one aspect, but make sure that the fish have welfare standards throughout their lives, even in their final moments. So I think we're out of time, and I want to be respectful of your time, Albin and Matt. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was such an interesting panel and discussion. Everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us too. The next talk is in 10 minutes. It will be Dr. Lynn Sneddon. She will tell us about the benefits of enriched environments, as well as the current barriers to using enrichment in aquaculture settings. This is a really key aspect for us here at ALI because it has been quite neglected in the aquatic animal welfare space. So we're very excited about it. Yeah, I wish we could all just have a cup of coffee right now and chat a bit, but unfortunately that's not an option. So the next best thing is the Huba app. So if you don't have it yet, make sure to get it and have the opportunity to network, at least virtually, with all the attendees and all the speakers. And we hope to answer the questions that we didn't get to, maybe by email or in the Huba app later on. So yeah, we have 10 minutes break, and yeah, everyone stretch a little and get ready for the next talk. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.